First off, I'd like to thank you for taking some time out of your day to watch this seminar live. As always, live is interesting. Um, just to let you know that who I am, I'm Kevin Mamajek. I'm a product marketing or product offering manager with Tridium. I am a container newbie, so I'll preference that up front. I'm learning, and part of the learning process is I also try to teach. So this is one of those processes where I have to vet it out before I put it into a slide deck, and you'll see that I've got a bunch of slide decks that we'll be able to share with some of the um, questions that I've received over the last 6 months on containers. So I'm also joined by Swami. He is the lead engineer for containers. He will be doing a lot of the tough technical questions in the Q&A. So you'll be able to ask some questions and we'll try to get to them. If we don't get to your answer or your question and give you an answer, we take that Q&A, post-process it, and then we'll get those answered and then post it underneath the actual Tridium talk itself. So get the right window here. Just a little housekeeping, right? The Q&A button is where you're going to ask your questions. We are recording this, a little legal. Since I'm not capturing your voices, you don't have to acknowledge anything, but we will post this this event probably within 2 weeks, right? Just give us some time for it to cook in the cloud, and then we will post that. And then I will post some supporting documents like these PowerPoints on how to back up and my template for diagnostics. So we'll get those up there as quickly as possible. This is where you'll find it, right? So just go to the Tridium talk section. That was what the previous slide was. And then you'll be able to find this one, and then we'll list those supporting resources underneath it. So it's usually those resources are per talk. So before we begin, I just want to kind of cover what's in this for those that are going to watch this recorded. I'm going to talk about what a container is. Now, I have two audiences that are probably on this call, and we'll get to those, IT and then Niagara. So I'm going to kind of do a broad brush of what a container is to kind of explain how Tridium implements it, and then we'll look through how a subscription works. We'll actually go in and I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to deregister my container and then re-register it so you can see how the registration process works. Show you my YAML file, and then we'll talk through some backup and restore. Everything that I'm going to share with you today is some sort of question that has come up as people start to implement containers. And so I've kind of captured that and put it together. Your questions are pivotal to what I'm going to talk next. So if you've got comments there, you want to see a certain topic with container, let me know. This is just, again, as I come up to speed, I want to be able to grow in how this works. I want to get to the IT side. I'm pretty good at the Niagara side, but we're going to capture that feedback and then use it to plan out another Tridium talk on containers. So what is a container? So I use Copilot since everybody's into the AI thing. And I said, hey, what's a container? And it came back and said, hey, it's essentially a bunch of code, all of its dependencies, some system tools and libraries, and some basic settings, all packaged up into an image. And that image then allows you to consistently run it across multiple different platforms. So it's a packaging up of stuff. So what's in the Niagara framework? Obviously, it's our framework. It's any of the modules that we need for the default setup. It's tools that we need inside the container to do some things and all the appropriate libraries to run that. So we publish it as a Docker container. So what does that mean? There's lots of orchestration software, the technical term, to run these containers in different environments. Right out of the gate, this is the one that we're kind of supporting. I have customers that we'll get to that actually are not using Docker, but this is the one that we kind of support right now. And that is this way of using their software to run multiple containers, configure the container, load the image, and that's what I'm doing in my demo here. So there's containers have been around a while. It's how the web is actually created and deployed. In IT, virtual machines were a rage, and then that's kind of starting to transition into containers because of how efficient they are. And so if you look at essentially a virtual machine, it requires the complete operating system. Then you install your Niagara framework, and that could be running against other virtual machines that are competing for resources. And even though on that particular box, it's trying to manage that, it has a lot more overhead and it has a lot more costs involved. Containers actually simplifies that whole structure so that you take these lightweight, images, these Niagara containers, which have a very minimal OS in them, and then you run it inside an engine that orchestrates all the communications and all the load balancing. So this is a much more efficient way of running in an IT world. And when I show you how I update from one version of Niagara to the next, if you don't know how that works, it's like a brick will hit you in the head. It's that easy. And I'll show you how that works. Okay. So lightweight, there are little OSs inside our containers. We actually, the release we just released, we actually went to the next long-term release for Ubuntu. Some customers have been asking for that. But the idea is it's lightweight, it's much more efficient, it's much more easier to manage, and it's secure in that each of those containers are isolated. So what does that mean? So for a while there, I had to figure out how this comes together on what we cram into that box, right? And so there's an application image, which you would get from your OEM or from Tridium, and that is the Niagara framework. Everything that you need to run a supervisor is inside of that image. Now what you have to do is you have to tell the container that's pretty much, you can't change that. It's read only, but we know Niagara needs to read write. So there's actually a persistent storage part of this puzzle, and that's where it stores settings and licenses and any new modules that you might not have in the base image. It has it in that special store. And I tell you this because there are two distinct parts that IT usually knows how to manage, but you have to be aware of that. And I've noticed again in some of the troubleshooting, if you start the container in a different folder, it creates yet another persistent storage. So those are all locked and kind of shoved into that container. And why I kind of went to this way is, again, you'll need to understand persistent storage to make sure you have enough room. But those are inside the container, and those are the two main components that I'll show you in the demo of where they're located. So it's kind of corny, stick with the boat thing, ports of call. What does this mean? So in my environment, I'm running Docker. That host that these containers are running in most likely are running other containers. So when you go and add the Niagara container, we have to actually let the host know what can communicate to it. So for example, what you need is you need Workbench to be able to register and enable the station to start. That communication has to happen to the container. So your host needs to understand what ports can be passed to that particular container. And Docker has a whole methodology, and most containers have that. But I'm just calling it out because this can cause some connectivity issues if it's isolated or on a different type of network. But you have to understand that Workbench needs to be able to communicate with that host, pass in the appropriate platform port, and be able to make that connection. So in Docker, there's a YAML file that when I started up, I explained to it in this configuration file what ports it's expecting to be able to communicate on. And then the host and the container know how to pass that information. The other big piece to this puzzle is that host needs to be able to allow the container to get outside of the network into the internet. So we have essentially a registration server that needs to be able to be communicated to. So both Workbench and the host and the container need to be able to understand that they have to pass communication to that registration server. And then once that's done, we're going to pull a license down into the container and you'll be off to the races. But keep in mind that every 2 weeks, the container checks in with the licensing server. So that connection needs to stay in place. So things that I've seen, again, working with customers with setting up a container, is that I have two groups of people I usually deal with. I have IT, that is a Jedi Master on containers, but they're Padawans on Niagara. And then I have folks that are Jedi Masters on Niagara, and they're Padawan like me, a newbie on containers. And so it's actually the combination of the two that actually can stand up the container. So what I'll kind of refer to is what are some of the issues that I've seen folks trying to stand up a container. And what it is the non-communication between those two groups, right? The Niagara folks need to tell them what ports, right? They can actually see what ports we default to, but I've had customers that IT changed the ports. They didn't want to use those default ports, and they changed them, and then they didn't tell the Niagara folks, right? Everything was running, but we couldn't connect to it. So be aware that, you know, IT might put some limitations on what ports are going to come in and out, but we have to have those ports open, whether they use the default numbers or not. I've run into problems where the container persistent storage wasn't enough to take the station. There were a couple customers that had big stations. So keep in mind that IT needs to understand what your requirements might be for putting something into that container. Can't reach the registration server. So those are some of the things that I've dealt with. You set it up, and then the connection doesn't allow the registration or the actual container to check in. And if it doesn't check in with 2 weeks, it goes into a mode where it tries every 24 hours for a number of times. And if it cannot communicate with us, it will actually shut down. So you never want that to happen, but that's one of the components that are in there. ARM versus AMD. I only tell you this because I can't tell you how many times Swami goes, Kevin, you're using the ARM in your Intel AMD box, right? So we do both. There's a reason, but keep that in mind that can cause issues. And then the other thing is when you use file domain versus network domain. So we'll talk about that. And I've also seen clones, and I'll explain how that happens. So those are just some of the things that I've encountered. It's the two-way communication between the Niagara folks and IT that make this successful and stand it up pretty quickly. So there's two versions, actually 4 files that we can send you: an ARM 64-bit FDA and NDA, and then there's a AMD 64-bit FDA NDA. So depending on how it's deployed, you'll need to know, usually for the IT folks, which one that they want and how they'll actually deploy it. So when you look at what FDA is, I use FDA because it makes the container act just like a JACE. So I use Workbench to register it and activate it. I would also use Workbench to change the default passwords and set the passphrase. So to a Niagara person, this is like I'm commissioning a JACE. It acts the same way. With native domain, which I think I said the wrong phrase just moments ago, but native domain, you have to use essentially a volume that passes the platform password and the system passphrase into the volume. Why that's important is a lot of times there are other tool chains involved with containers. This makes it very easy to manage that, where they can use tools to put a container onto one set of hardware versus another. So we do both. You just want to make sure that you give the right file to IT for them to stand that up. So how we sell it, it's a supervisor. So for those Niagara folks, This is nothing new to you. You can buy how many network Niagara connections you want. You can do device packs if you're going straight devices. So this shouldn't surprise you, but those are the components that are available. There are some add-ins. I always get questions on this. We do have add-ins for cameras, and I think the biggest one is people want to know about the HTTP and the JSON toolkit. So you can add that into the container for an extra cost. And then, of course, if you wanted to run analytics, these are all add-ons that you can. So keep that in mind. So this is kind of, again, to hit the basis of what's included. You get a year's subscription when you pay. You get a subscription key that you don't want to lose. And trust me, I've had that. I've lost mine, and now you'll figure out why you never want to lose that key. And we actually create an email now to remind you this is important. And then you'll see in 4.15 we've actually added some functionality to again remind you don't lose that key. So the container supports IP-based drivers, right? So there is no serial legacy component within the container itself. It is headless. So there isn't a version of Workbench that is installed inside the container. It is completely the Niagara framework. What headless means is you don't want a UI to pop up and stop the container because it's waiting for some kind of answer. So everything is designed to work so that none of that happens. There's the different images. You can register and deregister yourself now if you're running 4.15, which we'll actually demonstrate, and you'll get a bunch of documentation and YAML files. So what you don't get is Workbench. Usually that's not an issue because the Niagara folks already have it. And you also don't get the ability to clone these containers. So I know that some folks have done that where they'll take a container and then they duplicate it and run it in different environments. Those will all each need their own subscription. So this is a one-to-one ID from the key to the actual containers registration ID, like a host ID. Okay. All right. So that's the only thing that is a hiccup for me, in that IT sometimes want to jump the gun and they want to get it up and running before the Niagara folks get involved. And so that's the only reason why I bring that up, is Workbench is required. I will give you this. I'm not going to give you the 4.14. If you're interested, I can, we can get you that later, but this is the cadence of 4.15. We just finished up U2. You'll see that there's a U3 coming in the fall. This will allow you, and once you see how easy it is to update a container within Docker, you'll eat this up. You'll be, oh, okay, I can switch to an update build pretty easily. So keep in mind that this is 4.15 is our long-term release for version 4. All right, so let's go into a quick demo here. Now, I know I did. I forgot to stay logged in. Let's see if I can stay logged in here. All right, and it didn't. Let me go back to here. All right, so I've got two things set up here. I've got my container, and it's not running Niagara yet. I'm going to go in and show you the YAML file here, just so that you understand how I'm going to start this up. So we give you an example one. This is one that I've edited. Couple things to note: that you can go in and change the heap size and the max heap, right? So that's something that traditional Niagara folks do for supervisors, so you can configure that. You'll notice that I'm going to be running 4.15.1 for my image. I've got my persistent storage there. We've also just added this in I think 4.14. If you want the time zone to carry over from the container, you need to map this out as a volume for the local time zone. And then you'll see that I've told the container when it starts up what ports will be active and be able to communicate to it. Okay, so that That is Docker's way of implementing kind of like a script, and it will allow me to launch that. Now, all the engineers do it by command line. I'm not that good yet. So, so what I'm going to do is start that. So that's this Docker Compose is. It goes and takes that script, runs through it, configures it, and then launches the container, makes sure the ports are open, and will start the station. So this is a station, or this is a container that is already registered. And to show you this, I'm going backwards just so that you can see this kind of self-service thing. But you'll see the station has started and it's complete. So if I come over here and I look at this platform, you will see it's up and running. Now, what's important to know is the container will always run and the platform will always communicate regardless of whether it's registered or not. It's the station that won't start if it's not registered. And we did that on purpose so that we can get IT to start that up and then get all of the ports enabled, and then we can communicate to it so that we can actually go through the registration process. So the good thing is that's a great way of testing that you have compatibility. If you can connect through Workbench, all the ports are up and running and you're ready to go. So if I'm going to, let's walk backwards now. I'm going to go in here and say, let's deregister this. I'm going to undo what we've done. So this has a host ID, and you'll notice it's an NRE ID. I'm going to go actually and click deregister. It's going to warn me. It's going to put this in an unlicensed state in the licensing server. I'm going to say, okay. And then it's going to say, hey, here's your key. So don't tell me you don't have the key because we actually show it to you, but it's in an email. I actually log it in my instance that I'm running in, and then we give it to you when you deregister because I need that key in order to re-register it, right? So now I'm in a state where I'm unregistered, and notice that the host ID already changed. So there's a regenerate button if you want to do that. You're playing the lotto, you want to regenerate it, or I have to because I went into a clone mode or things of that nature. But I can actually, that happens automatically. I'm now ready to register this. And you'll see that in my log over here, it's deregistered. So I'm going to go ahead and say register. It's going to say, okay, you need a key. Now, I didn't copy that key because I have it in a document, right? So I'm going to go ahead and copy my key. And you'll see in here, I have all these things on when I changed it. So I've changed this one quite a few times in the process of creating training and things of that nature. I'm going to paste that key here. And that's going to set me up so that I will go and hit a URL. So I'm going to copy the code. I'm going to hit this URL, which is going to go in and say, okay, what's that code? And I'm going to paste that code in, and then I'm going to say connect, and I'm going to allow it. And then that's going to start the process where now I can actually see the license get registered. And if I come down here and we look at the station, you'll see that it's in this polling mode. And then I come back in here, say, okay, and it will talk to the registration server. It will see that it's successful. It will see that the license comes down, and then I can go ahead and restart it. And at that point in time, the station is now allowed to run. So you'll see from the log here as we get started that all of that will begin. I can look then at the platform, see that I'm running 415.1, so update 1, that the container is registered. If I look at the station, it's registered and it's running, and I can come down here into the actual station itself and see that we are live. So I'm just going to run, I have a little template I can send you, but it just says, hey, what processor I'm running, what's the host operating system, and then the processor NRE and what version of the station I'm running in. So kind of a little visual thing that I'm up and running. So Let me show you now that we've got it registered, how easy it is to update. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to shut this down. So I'm telling the container to shut down. I'm going to tell the container to completely shut down and remove any of the instances. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to go from one version of Niagara, update 1, to update 2. So if I go back into my Docker Compose, now since I'm live here and typing while trying to teach sometimes can run you into problems of typos, and I don't want that. I actually have it typed in. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put a remark symbol in front of that one, and I'm going to take away the remark symbol on this one. Now, I've already loaded the image, right? So I took the file that I get from Tridium, I've loaded that into the Docker system so that it has a bunch of images. I'm just telling it now to instead of running the 4.1 instance, you know, the update 1 of 4.15, I want it to now run the second or the update 2 of 4.15. That's all I have to do. And I'm going to save that. Now, if I come back and we go back to my console and I say Docker compose, oops, up. This time when it fires it up, it's going to actually use the updated version of Niagara, the 4.2 or the 4.15.2. Okay, so this will come firing up. So just with changing out the image name, I was able to update that entire container to a new version of Niagara. I didn't have to recommission it. I just had to load that new image in. And then I had to tell it, don't use the older one, use the newer one. And then that gives me the capability of now coming over here and saying, all right, where are we? So if we look, we'll, oh, wait a minute, did I do the right thing? Because here's my demo and it, oh, there it is. I had to refresh it. So now you can see that I'm running 4.15.2. All right, so I'm running the update. We can see in the station, I'll go ahead and log in there. And then if I bring up my little diagnostics, you'll see that we're running 4.15.2. So just with one command line in that file or in that YAML file, I was able to upgrade from one version of Niagara to the next. So IT's known this for a while. It's just for us Niagara folks, this is like, wow, that's pretty cool. I get it now, right? Because that if I update a supervisor, I have to run an installer and I have to do all those types of components, and I would have to do that in a VM. And here it's just super, super easy. Okay. So the other thing I'll cover, and then we'll call it a day, is that again, I have a lot of questions on, and especially comes from IT, how do I back up containers? So you need the Workbench tool, right? You still need Workbench. It's traditionally the same, so I can go ahead and go ahead and back up the container. Now, there is a caveat that a backup that you do can only be restored to the exact same container. So I've just backed it up. If I would go and try to use the distribution file to restore that, you'll see that there's going to be a bunch that are locked out. So those are ones that I cannot restore, even though they're the same station, because those have different host IDs. So be aware of that. I always lead folks to the station copier. That's the other way that sometimes we have to move things around. I can copy the entire station, and then of course this gives me the flexibility where I can install it into another container without any kind of restrictions. So what I've done is I've created a bunch of PowerPoints that we'll publish to the site. that has all of these things. And again, if I have a lot of questions that are coming to me from customers, I usually create something to email and put out onto the support sites. But I've handled how you walk through a subscription, all the different dialogues, including if I have to create a community ID, because you do need to have a active community ID in order for you to bind the thing. That's all covered in the deck. I have upgrading containers. There was a caveat that for the last update build for 4.14 to 4.15, we changed the ability of Niagara to not run in the admin user. It actually, or the root user. That's not a really good thing to do. So for 4.14 update 3, I think, and all of the 4.15s, it actually runs as a Niagara user. So that was, again, requests from IT on how we do that. And then, of course, I have a deck on backup and restore and the caveats of that. So that is my real quick, well, it wasn't so quick, we're already a half hour, talking about Niagara containers, about how to get the subscription, how they're purchased with the part numbers and what you can add to them. All of that is, again, we'll put those recordings up and capture those for you. So if I go and look at some of the Q&A, I can see that there have been some answers, and we can kind of scrum through there and see what we've got. Okay, so yeah, so I know, so we get a lot of questions on, okay, I have a different container orchestration environment. We publish ours as Dockers, right? Which just means that's the tool that we use to package them all up, and they can orchestrate those really quickly. Our container, we don't support the container running in any other environment just because we haven't been able to test it, right? So the one we have now is Docker. I have customers that have taken our image and put it into a different container environment. The problem is there's really no support. We don't know that environment. And you'll run into some of those problems that I had where the ports aren't there or there's not enough space. But the containers are portable. So it's just a matter of understanding what environment you're trying to start it up in, right? So we make the ARM version so it can run on edge devices, which is really cool. And there's a lot of these new edge devices that allow you to run containers inside them. And so it works real well there. And that's their way of orchestrating the container versus others. So, can I do Red Hat Linux? Absolutely. Can I do Ubuntu Linux? Absolutely. When you look at the container, you don't really worry about what's inside the container. It's where you're running the orchestration, that host OS that you would run on. I'm just using Ubuntu, but I have an instance of Red Hat where it's running fine too, using the Docker tools, because they have OpenShift, which is another set of tools for them, right? Let's see, a couple more. This is a normal instance of Niagara. Yep. So there's nothing other than headless. What that means is there's no UI. So anything that was in the Niagara space that needed to have a UI that popped up because it asks you something for configuration, those aren't supported yet. But we've pretty much got the base in there all together so that you can start up the instance and it can run without any interference from a UI block. I know there's a question on repositories. Our goal is we want to get there. Right now, you get the images from the OEMs that are selling you those images. So those usually will come from an infrastructure they have. I have a way of doing it on the community if we need to pass the images, but they're deployed the same way they're sold, right? And so keep that in mind on how that goes. So there's a lot of great questions. And so I want to open up before we hang up that if you have essentially a request for what you'd like to see next in containers, and I capture this as voice of the customer. So you're helping steer our direction in containers. Pop those in before we hang up. You can just say, hey, this is a request, because we will capture those and then we can follow up and do other types of Tridium talks. So that's the goal. I will tell you that I just see this. Is there a way of transferring a supervisor that's already up and running to a container? No, we don't have that. That's a great question. Essentially, there are two different types of there's a perpetual license, right, where you get the license key and it runs. This is a subscription model, so it's renewed every year. So the two right now, I can't correlate or mix those. It's two separate pieces. So if I had a supervisor, I could keep that, or if I wanted to stand up and try this, we have a 90-day trial for containers. So keep that in mind. You could power it up, see how it works, and go from there. So with that, let me kind of close this off. I'm looking for my share button again. I had to turn off sharing because of I couldn't get to the QA tab. But just to kind of close out here, and again, I thank you for your time today, because I know all of us are busy. There is documentation on docs.niagaracommunity.com. It's just you have to look down to Niagara, and I've put a green box around it. That will get you to the container guide. So you're going to need an ID to register it. So this is not such a hard stretch. There are other Tridium talks that deal with container. So I'm not the first. Like I said, I'm just got this as something I need to manage. So I'm going through this process of learning it and communicating it to it. So this is kind of my level setting of my first Tridium talk. And then I'll take your feedback and move into what we'll do next. And again, your feedback is important because you're driving our direction with containers. So for example, the deregistration button in 415, that's you guys. You're like, hey, it's a pain in the butt to change the host ID and re-register it. So we built that functionality in the client. I got requests that, hey, we did a security scan. You're using the old LTS of Ubuntu inside your container. You need to get that up to the latest LTS. We've done that. So this is the time for you to give us that feedback. And again, I want to thank you for your time. And this will be recorded and posted in about 2 weeks.